6 American missionaries vanished without a trace in the densest part of the Amazon rainforest, triggering one of the largest search operations in the region's history. Multiple nations, satellite technology, and indigenous trackers found nothing but eerie silence where 6 lives should have been. The case went cold for a decade, relegated to dusty archives and fading memories. Then, Dr. Elena Cortez received an unmarked package containing 6 wooden crosses, each carved with the missionaries' initials. Carbon dating revealed the impossible. The wood was fresh, yet weathered, and embedded within each cross were fragments of personal items belonging to the missing. The crosses came from an abandoned village that wasn't on any map, in a valley officials insisted had been thoroughly searched years ago. And the DNA analysis suggested something far more disturbing than death. The missionaries hadn't vanished. They had transformed. If mysterious disappearances and shocking discoveries keep you up at night, you're in the right place. This is Last Seen Stories, where we talk about cases that defy explanation. Before we dive deeper into this Amazon mystery, take a second to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss our new episodes. Where are you watching from today? Let us know in the comments below. I'm always fascinated to see how far these stories travel. Now let's return to the 6 missionaries who vanished without a trace. The Amazon rainforest in June is a paradox, breathtakingly beautiful and mercilessly deadly. Sunlight filters through the dense canopy in dappled patterns, creating an emerald cathedral that stretches unbroken for thousands of miles. But beneath this beauty lies danger. Venomous creatures, flash floods, diseases that can kill within days, and the disorienting sameness that has swallowed explorers whole for centuries. It was into this paradise and prison that 6 missionaries ventured in June 2012. Their 4x4 vehicle loaded with medical supplies, water filtration systems, and solar-powered communication equipment. Their destination, a series of remote indigenous communities along the Javadi River, a tributary that snakes through the border regions of Brazil, Peru, and Colombia. Adam Vega, 42, led the team. A former Army Ranger turned missionary, Vega had completed 7 previous Amazon missions. His military bearing remained evident in his precise movements and the way he instinctively took point whenever the group moved on foot. The wedding band he twisted when anxious was inscribed with coordinates of where he'd met his wife, Rebecca. Unlike his teammates, Vega carried a satellite phone separate from the group's main communication equipment, a precaution from his military days. Redundancy saves lives, he'd remind the others. Dr. Sophie Lynn, 38, had abandoned a prestigious position at Johns Hopkins to serve remote communities. Practical and methodical, she documented every medical case in a leather-bound journal with a fountain pen, an anachronism she acknowledged with self-deprecating humor. "When the batteries die, ink still flows," she'd say. The small jade figurine she kept in her medical bag, a gift from her grandmother, was her only concession to superstition. Thomas Rodriguez, 29, served as the group's translator and cultural liaison. Raised in the borderlands between Brazil and Colombia by missionary parents, he spoke 5 languages, including 2 indigenous dialects. His easy laugh and gift of storytelling made him the group's unofficial morale officer. The worn deck of cards he shuffled constantly had belonged to his father, the kings and queens replaced with hand-drawn portraits of his family members. Kira Bennett, 34, was the team's environmental specialist and sustainability expert, New to missionary work, but veteran of 3 Amazon expeditions with conservation groups, she joined to help communities develop sustainable agriculture practices. The prescription sunglasses she constantly adjusted were her lifeline. Without them, the world dissolved into colorful blurs. Her voice recorder captured not just field notes, but also the ambient sounds of the rainforest. Audio memories, she called them. Noah Phillips, 26, the youngest team member, documented the mission through photography and video. A former journalism student with an uncanny eye for composition, his cameras were extensions of himself. The waterproof case containing his backup memory cards was marked with a bright orange X. "If something happens to me," he once joked darkly, "make sure these make it home." His nervous habit of clicking a pen when thinking irritated the others, though they rarely mentioned it. Daniel Richardson, 51, provided spiritual guidance while serving as the group's medic assistant. A widower who found purpose in missionary work after his wife's death, Richardson's medical kit always contained photos of his adult children alongside antibiotics and bandages. The small wooden cross he carved each night from local materials was both devotional practice and stress relief. The mission had begun routinely enough. After landing in Manaus, Brazil, the team had spent 3 days gathering final supplies and meeting with local officials. Smartphone videos show them laughing over dinner, Phillips documenting Lynn attempting to eat a particularly challenging local fruit that squirted juice across the table. Vega's final video call with his wife shows him confident, explaining their planned route as Richardson makes faces in the background. "We've got the best weather window of the year," Vega told his wife, the hotel's spotty Wi-Fi making his image freeze momentarily. "Clear skies predicted for the next 2 weeks, which is practically a miracle during transition season." Security footage from their hotel shows them departing before dawn on June 12th, loading their gear efficiently into 2 waiting vehicles. The pre-dawn air hung heavy with moisture, the distant rumble of thunder suggesting the day's heat would bring afternoon storms. The drivers, contracted local guides who would take them as far as the Javari River outpost, later reported nothing unusual about the group's demeanor or the journey to the Javari River outpost. The last confirmed sighting comes from Marcos Ferreira, owner of the Riverside outpost where the missionaries transferred their supplies to boats. His statement to investigators described a routine departure. They arrived mid-afternoon, very organized. While the younger ones loaded the boats, Vega and Dr. Len went over the maps one more time with me. They planned to reach the first village by nightfall, then continue upriver for approximately 10 days, visiting 5 communities before circling back. Everything was normal. They had proper preparation, had redundant communication systems, emergency supplies. I have sent hundreds of groups into the forest over 20 years. These people knew what they were doing. Ferreira's security camera captured blurry footage of the 2 boats disappearing around a bend in the river at 4:17 p.m. on June 12th. In the footage, Phillips can be seen filming the departure while Bennett points at something in the tree line, the others looking where she indicates. The water reflects the darkening sky as clouds gather for the typical late afternoon shower. This final, mundane moment would be scrutinized by investigators for years, yielding nothing but conjecture. What happened next exists only in the electronic breadcrumbs they left behind. The missionaries maintained regular contact during the first 5 days of their journey. Satellite phone logs showed daily check-ins with their sponsoring organization, Hope Horizon Ministries. These calls followed a predictable pattern: morning confirmation of their location, evening reports on the day's activities. Text messages exchanged with family members showed high spirits and routine challenges. "Humidity making everything mold overnight," Bennett texted her sister on day 3. "Even the mold has mold here. But the communities are incredible, so welcoming." On day 4, their tracker showed they had reached the third village on their itinerary, slightly ahead of schedule due to favorable river conditions. The village, a collection of thatched structures situated on stilts to protect against seasonal flooding, had welcomed them with a feast of fresh fish and manioc. Dr. Lin's final email to her medical supervisor contained detailed notes about treatments provided and supplies used. Treated 37 patients today, mostly routine, parasitic infections, minor wounds, one case of early-stage malaria that responded well to treatment. Locals mentioned unusual weather patterns affecting fishing. Bennett is investigating potential environmental factors. The first sign of anything unusual came in Vega's last communication on the evening of June 17th, day 5 of the expedition. The satellite phone call to mission coordinator David Wells lasted 6 minutes, longer than previous check-ins. The connection had been spotty, the satellite signal weakening as storm clouds gathered over the river. Wells later reported, Adam mentioned they had met an indigenous man from a village not on their maps. The man had approached them as they were preparing to leave, speaking a dialect that even Tom Gujek had difficulty understanding. He had invited them to visit his community, which he said was a half-day's journey from their current location. Adam was excited because this village apparently had no previous contact with medical missionaries. He said they were going to adjust their route to include this village before continuing to their next scheduled stop. When asked if anything in the conversation seemed concerning, Wells was emphatic. Absolutely not. Route adjustments happen on almost every expedition. Adam sounded positive, said they had plenty of supplies and the detour would only add 2 days to their journey. He ended the call saying they'd check in once they reached the new village. That check-in never came. The following evening, when no call was received, Hope Horizon followed standard protocol for missed communications. They attempted to reach both satellite phones and sent messages to the team's emergency beacon. All went unanswered. The silence felt especially ominous against the backdrop of the team's previously reliable contact schedule. Still, there was no immediate alarm. As Wells explained to investigators, communication gaps happen in the Amazon. Dense foliage can block satellite signals. Equipment gets wet or damaged. We had a 48-hour buffer before escalating to emergency protocols. But when a second day passed without contact, concern mounted. The organization attempted to reach the last known village on the missionaries' route via radio relay through local partners. The response deepened the mystery. The village chief confirmed the missionaries had left as planned 2 days earlier, accompanied by a man he didn't recognize. Not from any nearby community, the chief reported through the static-filled radio connection. He spoke an unfamiliar dialect. More troubling was the chief's description of the man's appearance, traditional face markings that didn't match any known tribe in the region. The markings were wrong, the chief had said, his voice lowering as though reluctant to continue. They resembled the old stories our grandfathers told of the forest people who walked between worlds. On June 20th, 8 days after their departure and 3 days since their last communication, Hope Horizon triggered emergency protocols. They notified the U.S. Embassy, Brazilian authorities, and the specialized search and rescue team they kept on retainer for such situations. By the time search coordinator Maria Suarez arrived at the Riverside outpost on June 22nd, 10 days had passed since the missionaries departed. The search team's initial aerial survey of the region revealed nothing but unbroken canopy along the riverside where the tracking device had last transmitted. From above, the Amazon presented itself as a vast green ocean, its secrets protected by layers of vegetation so dense that even heat-sensing equipment struggled to penetrate it. When they reached the final village where the missionaries had been seen, Suarez found a community gripped by an unexplained fear. The village chief, who had spoken via radio, now refused to discuss the missionaries or the stranger who had led them away. Other villagers would only say that the place the stranger came from was bad ground, a place their ancestors had warned them never to enter. The missionaries had vanished completely, as though the vast green expanse of the Amazon had simply swallowed them whole. The search for the missing missionaries quickly escalated into one of the largest operations ever conducted in the Amazon basin. Within 72 hours, a coalition force assembled. Brazilian military search specialists, American FBI agents specializing in overseas disappearances, indigenous trackers from 4 different tribes, and private contractors funded by Hope Horizon Ministries. Maria Suarez, coordinating the effort from a hastily established base camp, had 20 years of experience finding people lost in the Amazon. The base camp hummed with activity, satellite communications equipment, detailed topographical maps spread across folding tables, and the constant drone of generators powering the operation. On day 1 of the operation, she expressed cautious optimism to the assembled teams. "We have several advantages," she explained, pointing to a satellite map covered with grid markers, her finger tracing the meandering line of the Hovery River. The missionaries were following established waterways, maintained regular communication patterns, and had multiple GPS-enabled devices. Most importantly, we know precisely where and when they deviated from their planned route. The first phase employed 3 helicopters conducting grid searches along the river and surrounding areas, focusing on the region between the last confirmed location and their intended next stop. The thudding of rotor blades became a constant soundtrack, punctuated by the crackle of radios as teams reported findings, or more often the lack thereof. Infrared cameras scanned for heat signatures beneath the canopy, while teams on boats methodically checked every tributary and landing point. 4 days into the search, they found their first clue, and the first sign that something was very wrong. A local fisherman discovered one of the missionaries' boats partially submerged in a small tributary nearly 15 miles downstream from their last known location. The vessel showed no signs of damage, its motor intact, though the team's supplies were missing. Most puzzling was the boat's position. It appeared to have been deliberately concealed beneath overhanging vegetation rather than simply abandoned. "It doesn't make sense," Suarez told FBI agent Marcus Delgado as they examined the boat, the humid air thick with the scent of decaying vegetation and the distant calls of howler monkeys. If they encountered trouble on the river, why hide the boat? And where is the second vessel? The aluminum hull still contained traces of the team's presence. A waterproof first aid kit tucked beneath a seat, a water bottle bearing Bennett's name, and most puzzlingly, a single playing card, the King of Hearts from Rodriguez's deck, placed carefully in the center of the boat's floor. The card showed no signs of exposure to the elements, suggesting it had been placed there recently, not left behind during the disappearance. Ground teams expanded their search radius, cutting through dense undergrowth along both sides of the river for miles. The machetes sliced through vines and ferns, the searchers battling not just the vegetation, but the disorienting sameness of the jungle. Indigenous trackers found occasional signs of passage, broken branches, footprints, and muddy embankments, but these tracks ended abruptly, as if the group had simply vanished mid-journey. On day 9, search teams made a more disturbing discovery. Dr. Lin's medical bag, its contents meticulously arranged on a flat rock at the edge of a small clearing 3 miles from the river. Nothing was missing from the bag. Medications, instruments, and her personal journal were all present. The journal's final entry, dated the morning of their disappearance, mentioned only routine patient treatments at the previous village. "I don't understand," one of the searchers said, staring at the precisely arranged medical supplies. "It's like someone set this up as an exhibit." Most unsettling was the careful arrangement of the items, laid out as though for inspection or inventory, not dropped in haste or panic. Nearby, searchers found a small jade figurine, Lin's good luck charm, placed atop a carefully folded piece of paper. The paper, when unfolded, revealed a crude map drawn in what lab tests later confirmed was organic charcoal mixed with sap. The map depicted what appeared to be a river system, but it matched no known waterway in the region. At its center was a circular symbol with 6 marks around its perimeter. The charcoal lines seemed to pulse in the dappled light filtering through the canopy, an optical illusion that several searchers reported independently.
"This isn't their handwriting," Rebecca Vega said when shown photos of the map 3 weeks into the search. She had flown to Brazil against the advice of the U.S. Embassy, insisting on joining the search efforts. The humid climate had made her clothes stick to her skin, but she refused to leave the base camp, sleeping on a cot next to the communications equipment. None of them would draw like this, and Adam wouldn't leave a boat hidden. He'd want it visible, to be found. As the search entered its 4th week, hope began to fade. The rainy season intensified, flooding search areas and washing away potential evidence. The constant downpours turned the base camp into a mud pit. Equipment failures mounted, and the searchers' morale deteriorated with each passing day. The Brazilian military scaled back their contribution, citing resource constraints and statistical improbability of success after so much time. 6 weeks in, a potential breakthrough came when a hunter from a distant village reported seeing strange lights moving through an area locals called the Place of Twisted Trees, a valley approximately 20 miles from where the medical bag was found. The hunter's eyes had darted nervously as he spoke, his hands trembling as he described pulsing blue lights that moved against the wind. The region wasn't on the missionaries' planned route and hadn't been covered in the initial search grid. An expedition to the area revealed a landscape unlike any other in the region, trees with trunks that corkscrewed unnaturally, vegetation patterns that seemed deliberately arranged rather than naturally occurring. The botanist could not identify none of the plants, though they resembled known species, as if familiar flora had been subtly altered by unknown forces. At the valley's center, search teams found an abandoned campsite with the remnants of a fire pit. Carbon dating later showed the ashes were approximately 6 weeks old, corresponding to the missionaries' disappearance. "Someone was here," Delgado said, crouching to examine the fire pit, his boots sinking into the unusually soft soil. But was it our missionaries or someone else entirely? The discovery reignited the search, but the renewed hope was short-lived. After thoroughly combing the valley and surrounding areas, no further evidence emerged. The strange valley yielded its mysteries reluctantly, and the trails, if they ever existed, had been erased by time and elements. 3 months after the disappearance, with the seasonal floods making further search efforts impossible, the Brazilian authorities officially classified the case as suspended pending new evidence. The FBI maintained an open file, but withdrew active personnel. Hope Horizon's private contractors persisted for another month before financial realities forced them to withdraw as well. The families returned home, bearing not bodies to bury, but an absence more painful than grief, the tortuous uncertainty of not knowing. 5 years passed. The missionaries' disappearance faded from headlines, becoming another entry in the long, tragic anthology of those claimed by the Amazon. For the families left behind, however, time did not heal, but merely calcified their pain into a new normal. Rebecca Vega transformed her husband's study into a war room of sorts, walls covered with maps, timelines, and photographs connected by red strings. The room smelled of coffee and desperation, the blinds perpetually drawn as if to create a separate reality where Adam might still be found. She spent her savings hiring private investigators and making 3 more trips to Brazil, each yielding nothing but greater frustration. "The authorities have stopped looking, but I haven't," she told journalist Camila Lopez during a rare interview on the 5th anniversary of the disappearance. The journalist noted how Rebecca's hands never stopped moving during their conversation, twisting a replica of Adam's wedding band she now wore alongside her own. "Someone knows what happened. Someone always knows." Dr. Lynn's parents established a scholarship fund for medical students committed to serving in remote regions, insisting that the foundation's materials never refer to their daughter in the past tense. "Missing is not gone," her father told donors at the inaugural fundraiser, his voice grating as he clutched a jade figurine identical to the one his daughter had carried. FBI agent Marcus Delgado kept the case file on his desk, reviewing it monthly, even after his official reassignment. His wall of home office mirrored Rebecca Vega's own, a maze of connections and theories that his colleagues viewed with growing concern for his psychological well-being. He would wake at night from dreams where he walked endless green corridors, searching for 6 people who always remained just out of sight. "I've worked 212 missing persons cases in my career. 211 of them make sense. Even the unsolved ones follow logical patterns of evidence. This one defies explanation. 6 people don't just evaporate." The case remained stubbornly cold, despite occasional tantalizing leads. A Dutch anthropologist claimed to have heard stories from an isolated tribe about sky people who appeared and disappeared suddenly 5 years earlier. But when Delgado tracked him down, the researcher admitted the timeline didn't match the missionaries' case. Still, the description lingered in Delgado's mind. Visitors who came bearing gifts of healing then ascended into the forest canopy, never to return. A logger working illegally in a protected area reported finding a camera memory card that contained images of Americans in the deep jungle, but the photos turned out to be from an unrelated expedition 3 years earlier. The brief hope the discovery had kindled made its dismissal all the more painful for the families. A self-proclaimed psychic from Colorado insisted the missionaries had crossed into another realm through a portal in the forest. Her bizarre claims gained unexpected credibility when she correctly described the layout of the strange valley with twisted trees, a detail never released to the public. However, her subsequent revelations proved inconsistent and ultimately unhelpful. Then, in June 2022,
Almost exactly 10 years after the disappearance, Dr. Helena Cortez, a forensic anthropologist with the Brazilian Federal Police, received a package at her laboratory in Manaus. The unmarked box arrived on a Tuesday morning, delivered by a courier who couldn't recall who had given it to him or where. The sender was identified only as a friend of the truth. Inside the unmarked box lay 6 wooden crosses, each carved from different types of wood, each bearing crude initials that matched the missing missionaries. The crosses carried the scent of smoke and unfamiliar spices, an odor that clung to Cortez's hands afterwards despite repeated washing. A typed note accompanied them. Found in abandoned village, Upper Javari region. Not on any map. Village appears recently abandoned, but structures suggest decades of habitation. Location coordinates enclosed. These were arranged in a circle in the center of the village. I did not touch anything else. The enclosed GPS coordinates pointed to a location deep within an indigenous reserve, an area so remote and legally restricted that no search teams had ventured there during the original investigation. More puzzling still, satellite imagery from the past decade showed nothing but unbroken canopy at those coordinates. Dr. Cortez immediately contacted Agent Delgado, who had remained her primary liaison on the case years after the official search ended. Within 48 hours, they had assembled a small team and secured the necessary permits to investigate the site. "I don't know what we'll find," Cortez told Delgado as their helicopter lifted off from Manaus, the city shrinking beneath them as they headed into the vast green expanse. "But after 10 years of nothing, these crosses are either the breakthrough we've been waiting for or an exceptionally cruel hoax." The helicopter broke through the morning mist, revealing an endless emerald tapestry below. Dr. Cortez pointed through the window at what appeared to be an unremarkable patch of jungle. "There," she shouted over the rotor noise, her voice barely audible above the mechanical thunder. "That's the location from the coordinates." From the air, nothing suggested human habitation. No clearings, no smoke, no structures visible through the dense canopy. The pilot circled twice, confusion evident in his expression as he consulted his instruments. "Are you sure about these coordinates?" he asked, squinting at the unbroken green below. "There's nothing here." Delgado leaned forward, studying the landscape with narrowed eyes. After a moment, he pointed to a barely perceptible irregularity in the canopy pattern. "There, see how the trees form an almost perfect circle? That's not natural." The pilot found a small clearing half a mile away, large enough to set down the helicopter. The downdraft from the rotors bent the tall grass and scattered colorful birds into the sky. From there, the team, Cortez, Delgado, 2 Brazilian federal police officers, and an indigenous guide named Tupa, would have to proceed on foot. The jungle closed around them immediately, humid and oppressive. The air hung thick with moisture, making each breath feel like drinking rather than breathing. Tupa led with machete in hand, occasionally pausing to examine bent branches or marks on trees that were invisible to the others. After nearly 2 hours of difficult hiking, he stopped abruptly, raising his hand for silence. "We are being watched," he whispered, pointing to a tree where a small clay figure hung from a branch. A human form with exaggerated features and small stones for eyes. The figure seemed to turn its head as they passed, though when Delgado looked directly at it, it remained motionless. "Warning totems," Tupa explained, his voice low and reverent. "Very old magic. Not seen this since I was a boy." 50 yards further, the jungle gave way suddenly to what was undeniably a village, or had been one until recently. A dozen structures formed a perfect circle around a central clearing. The buildings were unlike any indigenous architecture documented in the Amazon, constructed of woven vines and living trees that had been bent and shaped to form walls and roofs. The effect was of structures that had grown from the forest itself rather than being built upon it. "This is impossible," Cortez whispered, touching one of the walls where bark and woven vines merged seamlessly. "These structures would take decades to grow this way." In the center of the clearing stood a stone altar, weathered and covered with moss. Arranged in a circle around it were depressions in the earth where the 6 crosses had evidently been placed. Dr. Cortez knelt beside one of the depressions, taking soil samples while Delgado photographed the scene. The soil was unnaturally warm to the touch, as though recently disturbed. "The village appears recently abandoned," Delgado noted, examining fire pits that still contained partially burned wood. The ashes retained heat, suggesting the fires had been extinguished perhaps only days before. "Maybe within the last month." The team split up to examine the structures. Inside each building they found evidence of habitation: sleeping pallets, cooking implements, personal items, all appearing to have been left in haste. A pot of stew still hung over one cold fire pit, its contents untouched, but showing no signs of spoilage despite the tropical heat. More disturbing were the walls themselves, which were covered in elaborate pictographs painted with natural pigments. "These tell a story," Tupa said, tracing the images with a reverent finger. "Not from any tribe I know, but I can read some of it." The pictographs depicted human figures descending from the sky, bringing objects that appeared to be the missionaries' equipment: medical bags, cameras, and what might have been their communication devices. Subsequent images showed the figures living among another group of humans, teaching them, healing them. The scenes had a luminous quality, the pigment seeming to catch light from sources other than the sun filtering through the roof. In one structure, larger than the others, they found a room containing 6 pallets arranged in a circle. Above each, personal items hung from the ceiling: a camera lens cap, a metal buckle, a fragment of fabric that appeared to be from medical scrubs, a pin, a playing card, and most strikingly, a small wooden cross matching the style of those sent to Dr. Cortez. "It's as if each missionary had a dedicated space here," Cortez observed, her voice hushed in the strange acoustics of the structure. "But the items are only fragments, symbolic representations rather than their actual possessions." The most unsettling discovery came in what appeared to be a communal structure at the far end of the village. Its walls bore the most elaborate pictographs, scenes depicting the 6 missionaries undergoing some type of transformation. The human figures gradually changed over the sequence of images, their forms becoming less distinct, more ethereal. Delgado felt a strange vertigo looking at the images, as though they existed in more dimensions than the flat surface should allow. The final panel showed 6 spirit-like figures returning to the sky, while human observers reached upward from below. Beneath this scene, a rough shelf held small carved figurines representing each missionary, identified by miniature versions of their personal items. "I don't understand," Delgado said, examining the carvings. The wood felt warm in his hands, as though recently handled, or perhaps even alive. Are they suggesting the missionaries died, or something else entirely? Tupa had grown increasingly uncomfortable as they explored the village. His usual confidence had given way to frequent glances over his shoulder, and he refused to touch anything. "This place is wrong," he said finally, backing toward the exit. "These are not normal buildings, not normal pictures. We should not be here."
As the team continued documenting the site, Cortez made another discovery, a hidden chamber beneath the central altar, accessed by removing a perfectly fitted stone slab. Inside was a small wooden box containing 6 cloth bundles. Each bundle, when carefully unwrapped, revealed human bone fragments, a finger bone, a tooth, a small piece of rib, each labeled with symbols matching the initials on the crosses. "We need to get these back to the lab immediately," Cortez said, carefully repackaging the remains. Her hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the implications of what they'd found. "If these are from our missionaries, DNA analysis should confirm it." As they prepared to leave, a sudden downpour erupted, rain so intense it seemed targeted at the village itself. The droplets fell straight and heavy, despite the absence of wind, creating a wall of water around the perimeter of the clearing. Within minutes, the team was forced to seek shelter in one of the structures. Through the curtain of water, Delgado noticed something strange. The pictographs on the walls were changing, the pigments running and reforming into new patterns before his eyes. "Dr. Cortez," he called out, pointing to the shifting images, "you need to see this." But when the rain stopped as abruptly as it had begun, the pictographs had returned to their original state. Delgado blinked, questioning whether he had imagined the transformation. Outside, the ground had absorbed the deluge completely, showing no puddles or typical after-rain moisture. As they departed, Tupa refused to look back at the village. His usual stoicism had been replaced by barely concealed fear, his pace quickening with each step away from the clearing. "That place, it exists in 2 worlds at once. We saw only what it wanted us to see."
The DNA results arrived 3 weeks later, confirming what the team had already suspected. The bone fragments belonged to the 6 missionaries. Each sample matched the DNA profiles created from personal items during the original investigation. The scientific certainty brought a finality that 10 years of uncertainty had denied the families. Rebecca Vega received the news in her kitchen, the phone sliding from her fingers as Delgado's words registered. The confirmation should have provided closure, but instead opened new wounds. Questions that had lain dormant now surfaced with renewed urgency, demanding answers science couldn't provide. "How?" she demanded when she met with Delgado and Cortez at the FBI field office, her voice echoing in the sterile conference room. "How did their remains end up in that village? Who were those people? Why would they keep pieces of them all these years?" Dr. Cortez explained the additional findings from her laboratory analysis, her clinical tone at odds with the supernatural implications of what she described. "The bone fragments show no sign of trauma or violence," she said gently, spreading photographs across the table. "No tool marks, no fractures consistent with injury. Rather, they exhibit patterns consistent with natural decomposition. However," she hesitated, struggling to frame the inexplicable in scientific terms, "the mineral composition of the bones has been altered in ways I cannot explain with current scientific understanding. The bones contained trace elements not found in human biology, metals and compounds that shouldn't exist together, molecular structures that defied classification. More puzzling still, the cellular structure showed patterns of reorganization rather than decay, as though the tissue had transformed rather than died. Further analysis of the wooden crosses yielded equally puzzling results. Each was carved from a different species of tree, yet all 6 trees were non-native to the Amazon basin, some not even native to Earth, according to botanical databases. Carbon dating placed the wood's age at over 200 years old, yet tool mark analysis indicated they had been carved within the past month. The village itself provided no further answers. When a larger expedition returned to the site 1 month after the initial discovery, they found nothing but unbroken jungle. No structures, no clearing, no altar, not even stumps or foundations to indicate buildings had ever stood there. Satellite imagery from various points over the past decade showed nothing but forest canopy at those coordinates. It was as if the village had never existed, or had somehow removed itself from our reality. 6 months after the discovery of the crosses, the Brazilian and American authorities officially closed the case. The death certificates listed unknown causes, and the remains were returned to the families for burial. The media coverage focused on the mystery finally being resolved, glossing over the inexplicable aspects that science couldn't address. Yet for those closest to the investigation, the official closure brought no satisfaction. Agent Delgado requested early retirement shortly after the case was closed. He moved to a small apartment in Manaus, where he continued to research similar disappearances across the Amazon basin. His walls soon filled with new maps, new theories, and new red strings. Nights found him sitting on his balcony, staring into the jungle beyond the city lights, listening for voices in the rustling leaves. Dr. Cortez published a controversial paper suggesting that the missionaries' case represented an encounter with an isolated human population possessing knowledge and capabilities outside our current scientific understanding. Her academic reputation suffered, but she remained convinced of her conclusions. She began spending more time in the field, seeking other areas where the boundaries between worlds might be thinner. Tupa, the indigenous guide, refused to speak of the village again. When pressed by researchers, he would only say, "Some places in the forest exist between worlds. Some people find paths between those worlds. Your friends found such a path." A year after the discovery of the crosses, Rebecca Vega received an unmarked package at her home. Inside was Adam's wedding band, the one inscribed with the coordinates where they'd met. The metal felt warm to her touch, as though recently worn. Attached was a handwritten note, in what forensic analysis confirmed was her husband's handwriting. "The work continues in ways I cannot explain. We are well. We are changed. We cannot return. Look for us in the spaces between what is seen and unseen. I love you, always." Authorities dismissed the note as an elaborate hoax, but Rebecca knew better. The band contained a small scratch on its inner surface, a flaw known only to her and Adam, never documented in police reports or mentioned to investigators. She began spending evenings in their garden, watching the spaces between trees where shadows moved differently than they should. On the 10th anniversary of the discovery of the crosses, 20 years after the initial disappearance, journalist Camila Lopez published an extensive investigation into the case. Her book, The Missionaries of the Impossible, compiled all known evidence alongside interviews with the families, investigators, and indigenous sources. Her conclusion, while speculative, offered the most cohesive theory. The evidence suggests the missionaries encountered something in the Amazon that defies our current understanding of reality. Whether this was an undocumented indigenous group with advanced knowledge of local plants and their consciousness-altering properties, or something more extraordinary, remains unclear. What seems certain is that Adam Vega and his team underwent a profound transformation, one that separated them from our world without ending their existence entirely. The village that appeared and disappeared, the crosses made of impossible wood, the pictographs that seemed to change when observed, suggest a reality more fluid than our scientific framework allows. The Amazon has always been a place where the boundaries between the known and the unknown grow thin.
Perhaps in that thin place, 6 missionaries found, or were found by, something that forever altered their path. For the families, the mystery remains both painful and strangely comforting. The wooden crosses stand in a memorial garden at Hope Horizon's headquarters, a reminder not of death, but of the thin veil between what we understand and what we don't. Rebecca Vega told Lopez in their final interview, "I don't believe Adam is dead. I believe he and the others found another way of being, one we're not equipped to understand. I feel him sometimes, in between moments, like he's standing just beyond a door I can't quite see. One day, I hope to find that door." And deep in the Amazon, where twisted trees grow in perfect circles, and rain falls in walls around clearings that shouldn't exist, indigenous stories speak of 6 healers who walk between worlds, appearing to those in greatest need before vanishing back into the spaces where our world touches others. Sometimes, if you listen carefully, in the right places, you might hear the click of a camera shutter, the scratch of a fountain pen on paper, or the shuffle of playing cards, echoes from somewhere just beyond the veil, where 6 missionaries continue their work in ways we cannot comprehend.